So, 2025, crazy year, and more people than ever seem convinced that the United States of America is on the brink of some sort of major sectional crisis. The people who usually aren't worried are getting kind of worried, in other words. In Donald Trump, we have an impulsive and deliberately cruel executive who seems totally unconcerned with even the pretense of the rule of law. At his command is a roving death squad of rabid white supremacist police attempting a nationwide sweep of foreigners and dissenters that in practice feels more like ethnic cleansing than immigrant enforcement. And while congressional Democrats have proved utterly useless in countering this terror, Trump's opposition has substantial down-ballot and grassroots support. Count Dooku and his droids are striking from a hidden base. There are heroes on both sides. Evil is everywhere. But you know what? I'm feeling pretty okay about it. And the reason why is that I like to read history. Now, let me be very clear. Every historical circumstance is going to be wildly different, right? And comparing one with another, especially as a form of half-assed divination, will inevitably be problematic. This is the sort of video that could easily age very badly, and I don't claim to have all the answers here. No, wait, actually, I retract that. Yes, I do. But I look at the divide of left versus right in this country, and I don't see civil war. I see something else. Hi. This isn't an ad. Behind me are the ruins of Lindy Boggs Medical Center here in Mid-City, New Orleans. 20 years ago, during Hurricane Katrina, this whole neighborhood flooded pretty badly, and a lot of people around here fled to this building for safety. Thankfully, most of them made it out, but it's been abandoned ever since. I've gone by this building almost every day for more than 10 years, and for 10 plus years, it's captured my imagination. And recently, I got to make a movie inside it.
I'm terrified. Like, I felt this immediate weight walking in here,
New Orleans feels primed for telling vampire stories.
We're, 10 grand, 15 grand over budget, V? Yeah. It was crazy. There was a lot of goo, a lot of bodily fluids. But, we got our shots, we think. Moment of truth comes in the editing room.
Take 3, Mark.
I'm happy to announce that we've just wrapped principal photography on our new film, The Vampires of New Orleans, which is by far the biggest project that we've ever tackled. It's a docudrama which combines historical analysis with balls-to-the-wall gothic horror as we peel back the tourist kitsch and reveal the yawning chasm of societal dysfunction and anxiety beneath. It's our generation's answer to Anne Rice, and I promise you, you have never seen the Southern Gothic done quite like this. We're on track for an October release, and if you're interested in following the production, as always, we've got, behind-the-scenes posts, stills, and clips available exclusively over on patreon.com/Atun-Shei Films. Thanks. So there have been two big civil wars in America's history, and both started because of similar political mechanisms. The first one, commonly called the Revolution, I guess because the rebels won, was able to pick up steam because many of the people who led the uprising against the British Crown already had control of many of their regional power structures. Town governments, militias, legislative bodies, etc. Many of which only needed to be modified slightly to achieve revolutionary purposes. The second Civil War, the one starring Stephen Lang,
Venezuela, that was some mean bush,
was even easier to get going. Because the sectarian divide occurred along state lines, the power structures necessary for the Southern planter class to organize armed resistance to the United States government was prepackaged like a racist frozen dinner. And the first thing to note is that as of right now, as of recording in March 2026, we don't have anything even remotely comparable to that in our current moment of political strife. Now, I'm not saying it couldn't happen. One thing that Zohran Mamdani did recently that I thought was very shrewd was basically betraying his base on the issue of police brutality, cozying up to the NYPD and saying, I've had conversations with our brave and glorious police, and they've shown me the error of my summer of 2020 activist ways. Because the thing is, if Mayor Mamdani has any hope of seriously countering ICE terror in New York City, then he's going to need an army of thugs with guns that's answerable to him. If the Founding Fathers had said, the legacy of the town militia system is problematic and they have no place within our coalition, then General Gage would have burned down Concord to the ground and, that would have been that. But as much as I would love to see a Dark Knight Rises style pitched battle between ICE and NYPD in the streets of Bushwick, I personally don't think that that's very likely. When we look at the provincials and the regulars in the Revolutionary War, the Union and the Confederates in the Civil War, these different sides that came to blows throughout history, we can very clearly see that their economic interests did not align. And this was particularly true in 1861. I mean, the North and the South during the early Republic didn't just have different interests. They had completely different systems, different mechanisms by which bosses and workers related to their labor and the commodities they produced. The North was a fully industrial society, led by capitalists and powered by wage labor. The South was a gigantic prison farm. Though part of the American Republic, it was effectively still organized like an early modern cash crop colony, and most of the value that it produced went overseas to Great Britain. This is why you started to see tariffs become really appealing to Northern industrialists, to encourage the South to contribute more to domestic manufacturing. And they had this very real concern that the Southern planter class was not really pulling its weight in the national project. That's not to say that the Northern textile industry wasn't deeply complicit in slavery. They absolutely were. It's just that the planter class, was pretty fat and happy with the current arrangement of 3/4 of their cotton going to Liverpool and had little to no incentive to change that up. So the war breaks out, the Union wins, and Northern capital invests heavily in Southern industry. The South starts to urbanize. Birmingham becomes a big coal mining town. Atlanta becomes a big textile manufacturing town. The Southern economy diversifies, and cotton, the bedrock of antebellum slave society, becomes just one link in the chain. And in part by incorporating the South into their extractive economy, it only takes a few decades for the United States to surpass Britain as the world's foremost industrial powerhouse. And we have nothing comparable to that situation today. If the Democrats wanted to overthrow Trump, they could not simply call on state militias or militarize some police departments. Because, quite frankly, whether it's ICE or NYPD, different branches of the military, virtually any other viable armed power structure in America today, all these guys serve to protect one economic paradigm. A lot has changed over the last 10 years in American politics, but one thing that hasn't is that Republicans and Democrats are both pretty much all bought and paid for by corporations. Are Republicans and Democrats the same? No. But are their economic interests anywhere near as diametrically opposed as the Union and the Confederacy? Obviously not. So why would they fight, right? I mean, who would benefit economically from that war? Who would fund that war? Plus, when you get right down to it, I don't think the most important political fissure in America today is right versus left. I think it's top versus bottom. There are all sorts of theories about America's current decline. Feminism, black people in Star Wars movies, Asian people in Star Wars movies, the general concept of the gay. But as compelling as all these theories are, I'm inclined to believe our current troubles really began in 2008. How to explain for those too young to remember? Okay, so there was this thing called the 2008 financial crisis, no cap, and it was pretty lit. Wall Street was giving unaccountability. It was giving the hubris of unchecked power. And chat, they encouraged unprecedented subprime lending to line their skibbity pockets that sent the global economy high-key crashing out. And coming, as it did right when us millennials were entering the workforce, the economic fallout pretty much guaranteed that we would never be able to build wealth and that we were absolutely, positively never going to Hogwarts. And believe it or not, the Wall Street investors who were directly responsible for this catastrophe were not prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Instead, the US government awarded them with $400 billion of our money. This made a lot of people very angry and was widely regarded as a bad move. Pretty much immediately, we started to see populist rumblings in our politics. There's widespread cynicism, failing trust in institutions. On the right, the Tea Party emerged, and on the left, Occupy Wall Street. By 2016, these factions had solidified into two viable anti-establishment presidential campaigns, of course, led by Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders. So Sanders gets on TV and tells everybody that unchecked capitalism is this big problem, that billionaires are sucking us dry, and that the working class needs to utilize, the one viable weapon of class warfare that we have, regulatory agencies within the government, to relieve the economic pressure that we're all under. Then Trump gets on TV and tells us that the reason that we're poor, the reason that we're struggling, is not primarily these grand global political and economic forces, but rather deeply interpersonal cultural relations. You're not just poor because corporations moved your job to China, but because your gay daughter doesn't talk to you anymore, because of the diversity initiative at your office, because of plant-based meat at your grocery store, because of fucking Star Wars movies. And of course, this is not new. The right wing has been using the culture war as a tactic to capture the working class for decades. Most of Trump's rhetoric are just reheated talking points that Republicans have been using since the 70s. Particularly rich Republicans. And of course, despite his revolutionary bluster and, general chaotic energy, Trump's policies have pretty consistently aligned with the interests of his class. Slash regulations, promote big business, funnel money away from workers and toward bosses. Trump is, to state what should be painfully obvious, a fake populist. But again, many Republicans have been. What's different about MAGA is that it comes at a point of crisis, of system failure downstream of the 2008 crash, and 9/11 and the Patriot Act and, a lot of stuff. But the unsustainability of our economic system has become impossible to ignore, is the upshot, and something's got to give. It's overly simplistic to say that fascism is merely a capitalist tool of class warfare. Italian fascism, in particular, was much more complicated than that. But American fascism in the 21st century is just fundamentally about class. Billionaires are using it as a shield to deflect workers' vengeance away from them and toward scapegoats. Immigrants, intellectuals, bureaucrats, LGBTQ people, and so on, while they turn this crisis into an opportunity to dismantle what few obstacles to absolute power still remain in front of them. We will be reeling from the damage that MAGA has done for decades, possibly generations. But as a symptom of class anxiety, it's actually pretty easy to treat, and we wouldn't need to destroy capitalism to do it. Sorry. The way I see it, an excellent way to take the wind out of MAGA's sails would be some extremely mild and eminently achievable wealth redistribution. Just raise taxes on the rich a bit and put that money to public programs that will make people's lives better. And probably the straightest line to making that happen is to hijack the Democratic Party from the left and get people in office who aren't bought and paid for by corporations. And I know that this is going to be old news to many of you, but I promise there are still a lot of people out there who need to hear this. Well, I feel good. I'm glad that this video just solved all of America's problems. Second Civil War successfully averted. Not going to need this anymore. You're welcome, by the way. There's just one minor problem. Critical ecosystems are at risk of collapsing. If current rates of biodiversity loss continue, every critical ecosystem is on a pathway to collapse. The rate of extinction is tens to hundreds of times higher than the average over the past 10 million years. National security risks from ecosystem migration will rise as development begins to reverse. Serious and organized crime will look to exploit pandemic control over scarce resources. Biodiversity would take resources. Economic insecurity becomes. And you thought this video would be hopeful. I got you guys. Good. Of course there's going to be a second American Civil War. It probably just won't have anything to do with MAGA. There will be civil wars everywhere in the 21st century because we're currently undergoing Earth's sixth mass extinction and irrevocable global ecological collapse is already underway. I've been thinking a lot about this report recently called Global Biodiversity Loss, Ecosystem Collapse, and National Security. Yes, that's right, I printed it out like a boomer. Now, this was not written by some hippies in a tree sit, but rather some less fun but more credentialed people in His Majesty's government. And the gist of the report is very bad. Climate change is not coming. It is here, and it's been here. I know this might be hard for folks up in Ohio or whatever to understand, but I live in Louisiana, and I'm telling you, it's here. In fact, the report talks about how increased immigration from Latin America, a major factor in both the rise of MAGA and the increasing influence of Mexican cartels, has been fueled by blight in coffee crops and food insecurity caused by erratic weather patterns, which are, of course, exacerbated by climate change. Ecosystem collapse caused by human industrial activity, particularly in high-income countries, has already destabilized your country without you even knowing that that was the reason. The report says that the average size of monitored wildlife populations has declined by 73% over the past 50 years. That's probably not good. But those are all just animals out in the woods, and who gives a fuck about them, am I right? Well, it turns out that nature is a foundation of national security. Biodiversity loss is putting at risk the ecosystem services on which human societies depend, including water, food, clean air, and critical resources. The impacts will range from crop failures, intensified natural disasters, and infectious disease outbreaks to conflict within and between states, political instability, and erosion of global economic prosperity. Increasingly scarce natural resources will become the focus of greater competition between state and non-state actors, exacerbating existing conflicts, starting new ones, and threatening global security and prosperity. Lovely, lovely. There's a lot happening in the 2020s that has recent historical precedent, and I think we can glean some comfort from that, right? Some hope that this too shall pass. But anthropogenic climate change is truly unprecedented. Never before has a single species on planet Earth done so much damage and exerted such pressure on the biosphere as a whole in such a short period of time. Climate change won't be the apocalypse, but it will be very, 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 very bad. Possibly only matched in severity by events like the Bronze Age collapse, the Black Death, or the Great Dying of the Americas. When you consider the impacts on non-human life, it is already the biggest event of systematic mass murder in world history. And apart from a small cadre of scientists and activists, nobody's really talking about it or seriously preparing to deal with it. And I suspect this is because the solutions are completely unpalatable to almost everybody. There's a narrative on the left that climate change is caused by the rich and inflicted on the poor, and that's true. But what people often leave out is that when it comes to climate justice in a global sense, even the poorest American is petit bourgeois. All of us here in the global north are united along class lines in the idea that ecological collapse is totally worth it as long as we get to drive our Ford F-250s and eat our chicken nuggies and get our 2-day shipping. You could behead the billionaires, blow up the data centers, and disband the military tomorrow, and you would still be left with the undeniable fact that the entire foundation of our way of life is predicated on unsustainable ecocide and rampant, ongoing imperialism. The tyranny of the automobile and of the airplane must end. Animal agriculture and commercial fishing must end completely. No fucking half measures. Consumerism must end. We can do it. We have scalable technologies today that can transport, feed, and supply 7, 8, 9 billion of us equitably without trashing the planet. From sexy technologies like precision fermentation, which is basically growing food from microbes in a brewery tank. I had precision fermented egg whites last week. They're identical to the stuff that comes out of a chicken's ass and have better macros too, to technologies that have been around for a minute, like, I don't know, fucking trains. It wouldn't be easy. It would require a complete transformation of just about every facet of our daily lives. But we can do it. We could have done it in the late 20th century. We just lack the will. Oh boy. Well, I can't wait to spend my retirement years as a climate refugee cleaning toilets in Ottawa. That's going to be so much fun. And I hope to see you there. Oh, and will the last one to leave America please turn out the lights? How do you turn out these lights? There we go. How's that?